20,000 people were killed in 4 days, not in a war, not in a plague, not in a natural disaster, in a ceremony, a celebration, a party thrown by a king to honor his gods. The year was 1487. The place was Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Aztec Empire, built on an island in the middle of a lake, the most spectacular city in the Western Hemisphere. The occasion was the dedication of the greatest pyramid ever built in the Americas, and the guests of honor, the 20,000 people who had been brought from across the empire, fed and clothed and marched through the streets, had no idea they were not guests at all. They were the offering. And what happened to them over those 4 days is so precisely documented, so carefully recorded by both Aztec scribes and Spanish conquistadors who arrived 30 years later and interviewed survivors, that we know almost every detail. We know the numbers. We know the method. We know the names of the priests. We know what the king wore. What we don't know is how a civilization that built universities and hospitals and astronomical calendars more accurate than Europe's decided that this was necessary. That's the question this video answers. The setup, 0:45 to 6. Before you can understand what happened in 1487, you need to understand what the Aztec Empire actually was. Because the version you probably know, the one from movies and textbooks, is incomplete. The Aztecs were not primitive jungle dwellers. They were not mindless savages covered in feathers. And the Aztec Empire, at its peak, controlled 5 million people across central Mexico. Their capital city, Tenochtitlan, had a population of 200,000, making it larger than London, larger than Paris, larger than any city in Europe at the time. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés first saw it in 1519, he wrote back to the King of Spain that he could not find adequate words to describe its beauty. His soldiers, hardened veterans who had seen the great cities of Europe, wept. They thought they were dreaming. Tenochtitlan had running water delivered through aqueducts. It had causeways connecting the island to the mainland. It had a zoo with animals from across the continent. It had a botanical garden. It had schools that were mandatory for all children, boys and girls, rich and poor. It had hospitals. It had a market that Cortés described as twice the size of Salamanca, where 60,000 people traded every day with strict laws governing weights and measures. This was a sophisticated, complex, highly organized civilization, and it practiced human sacrifice on a scale that has no parallel in recorded history. Curiosity loop. Now here's what most people don't understand about Aztec sacrifice. It wasn't random. It wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. The Aztecs had a reason so logical within their worldview that their greatest philosophers and astronomers spent lifetimes refining it. And once you understand the reason, what happened in 1487 becomes even more disturbing, not less, more. Because it was committed by people who genuinely believed they had no choice. The Aztecs believed the universe was fragile, and their creation myths told them that the world had been destroyed 4 times before. 4 previous suns had risen and fallen. Each time, the gods had sacrificed themselves to restart the universe. The current world, the 5th sun, the world the Aztecs lived in, was sustained by a cosmic debt. The gods had given their blood to create the sun and the earth and humanity. And humanity owed that debt back. If the debt was not paid in blood, the sun would stop moving. Darkness would fall, the world would end. Not metaphorically, literally. The Aztecs looked at the sky every morning and feared the sun might not rise, and the way to ensure it rose was to feed it. With hearts, with blood, with life. Curiosity loop. And here's the part that historians argue about. Did ordinary Aztec people believe this? Did the priests believe it? Or was it a system of control, a way for the ruling class to maintain power through terror? We'll get to that, because the answer is more complicated than you think, and it changes everything about how you interpret what happened in 1487. The Templo Mayor, 6 to 1130. The Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, was the heart of Tenochtitlan. It sat at the center of the city. It was the tallest structure in the Aztec world, a massive stepped pyramid rising 60 meters above the plaza, with 2 shrines at the top dedicated to 2 gods. On the left, Tlaloc, the rain god who controlled water and agriculture and survival. On the right, Huitzilopochtli, the sun god and god of war, the patron deity of the Aztec people, the god who demanded blood to keep the sun burning. The pyramid had been rebuilt 6 times. Each new ruler expanded it. I built a larger pyramid around the existing one like a series of nested shells. Each expansion required a dedication ceremony. Each dedication required sacrifice. But the 6th and final expansion, completed in 1487 under the ruler Ahuitzotl, the 8th emperor of the Aztec Empire, was different in scale from anything that had come before. Ahuitzotl had spent years conquering new territories. He had expanded the empire from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. He had brought unprecedented wealth to Tenochtitlan, and he intended to dedicate his completed pyramid in a manner that would make every previous dedication look like a minor ritual. Curiosity loop. The preparations for the 1487 dedication began years in advance. Ahuitzotl sent his armies on what the Aztecs called Xochitlal, flower wars. The flower wars were a specific type of warfare unique to the Aztec world. The goal was not to kill enemies. The goal was to capture them alive. Warriors were ranked and rewarded based on how many captives they took, not how many enemies they killed. A warrior who killed his opponent in battle had wasted him. A warrior who captured his opponent alive had done his job. And the captives from the flower wars were brought back to Tenochtitlan and held in cages and enclosures, fed and watered, kept alive for one purpose: the 1487 dedication. But why keep them alive? Why not just kill them in the field? There's a reason. And it changes how you think about what sacrifice meant in the Aztec world. The Spanish priest Diego Durán, who arrived in Mexico in the 1540s and spent decades interviewing elderly Aztecs who had witnessed the 1487 ceremony, wrote an account called The History of the Indies of New Spain. It is one of the most important primary sources we have for the Aztec world. Durán recorded the preparations in detail. The captives were not mistreated. They were fed well. They were given clean clothing. Some were given the clothing of gods, dressed to represent specific deities. They were told they were going to become gods themselves. Some Aztec sources suggest that captives went to their deaths willingly because they believed the Aztec theology. They believed that dying in sacrifice was the highest honor, that they would ascend immediately to a paradise of eternal light, accompanying the sun on its daily journey. Pattern interrupt, 8 o'clock. Stop. I need you to sit with that for a moment. And because your instinct right now is probably to say, they couldn't have actually believed that. Nobody walks willingly to their death. But history is full of people who did exactly that when their religious worldview demanded it. Crusaders charged into battle expecting paradise. Kamikaze pilots dove their planes into ships believing they would become divine. Japanese soldiers in World War II died rather than surrender because their culture told them surrender was worse than death. The human capacity for sincere, total, absolute religious belief is unlimited. And the Aztecs had built an entire civilization around a theology that told them the universe literally depended on human sacrifice. So yes, some of them believed it. Maybe many of them believed it, which makes 1487 not a story of simple evil. It's a story of what sincere belief is capable of. The 4 days, 1130 to 1800. The ceremony began in the spring of 1487. The exact date is recorded in Aztec calendrical notation and corresponds to April or May in the European calendar. Ahuitzotl had invited rulers from across Mesoamerica to witness the dedication. Allies came, but he also invited enemies. Rulers from the Tlaxcala and other city-states that opposed Aztec domination were invited to observe. They came in secret, disguised, because accepting the invitation openly would have been politically impossible. But they came, because refusing the invitation of a man who had just built the greatest military empire in the Americas was its own kind of death sentence. The ceremony opened with ritual, days of fasting by priests, days of prayer, days of preparation. The temple was decorated with flowers and feathers and gold. The two shrines at the top were painted and cleaned. Priests who had not slept in days moved through the city in procession, chanting, burning incense, preparing the sacred space. And around the base of the pyramid, and in enclosures across the city, the captives waited. Curiosity loop. Here's something the sources record that historians rarely highlight. The line of captives was so long that when it was organized for the ceremony, it stretched from the Templo Mayor through the causeways and out of the city onto the mainland. Think about what that means physically. Tenochtitlan was an island roughly 4 miles across. The main causeway was 5 miles long. The line of 20,000 people extended beyond the horizon. See, Aztec citizens watching from their rooftops would have seen a human chain that literally disappeared into the distance. They knew what it was. They had seen dedications before. But nothing like this. Even for people who accepted sacrifice as normal and necessary, this must have been overwhelming. The ceremony itself was conducted simultaneously at multiple locations. The most important killing happened at the top of the Templo Mayor, at the shrine of Huitzilopochtli. 4 senior priests held a captive down on the sacrificial stone, a curved obsidian slab positioned so the victim's chest was thrust upward. A 5th priest, the high priest, used a flint knife to open the chest. The heart was removed and held up toward the sun. Then the body was rolled down the temple steps. At the bottom, other priests collected the body for further ritual. Mas pattern interrupt. 1330. I want to be precise here about something, because the popular image of Aztec sacrifice, the one from Hollywood, tends toward the gratuitous and the pornographic in its detail. The historical record is precise but not sensationalized. The Aztec scribes who recorded these ceremonies were not describing atrocities. They were describing liturgy, religious procedure, the same way a medieval European monk would describe a mass. The ritual had rules. It had order. It had meaning within its context. Understanding that doesn't make it less horrifying, but it makes it more historically accurate. And accuracy matters here because the question this video is really asking is not how could they be so brutal. The question is, how could an entire sophisticated civilization build its cosmology around this? That's the harder question. The killing at the top of the temple was conducted by the highest-ranked priests. But with 20,000 captives, the ceremony couldn't happen only at the top. Multiple killing stations were set up across the city. Priests rotated in shifts. The ceremony ran for 4 days without stopping, day and night, torches burning through the darkness, drums never stopping, chanting continuous. By the standards of what we know about human physiology, the priests involved would have been in an altered state by the 2nd day. Sleep deprivation, fasting, rhythmic chanting, the smell of incense and blood, the sound of drums. The ceremony was designed to produce a kind of collective trance in participants and observers alike. Curiosity loop. But here's the detail that Diego Durán records that stops historians cold. He writes that at some point during the 4 days, Ahuitzotl himself participated in the killing. The emperor, the man who commanded armies and governed 5 million people. He took the flint knife. He opened chests himself. He was not above the ritual. He was part of it. And this tells you something crucial about how the Aztecs understood power. A king who sacrificed was not debased by the act. He was elevated. He was demonstrating his personal connection to the gods, his willingness to do with his own hands what he commanded others to do. But here's what Durán records next, and this is where the story turns in a direction that nobody expected. The part nobody tells you, 1800 to 2230. There were people who refused, not many, but some. Among the 20,000 captives, there were warriors from enemy tribes who had been captured in flower wars, men who had trained their entire lives to fight, who had accepted capture as a battlefield reality, but who had not accepted death as inevitable. Some of these men fought back. At the moment of sacrifice, when 4 priests tried to hold them down on the obsidian stone, some of them broke free. Aztec accounts record that some captives had to be physically overpowered multiple times. Some accounts describe captives who managed to injure priests before being subdued. These accounts are recorded not with shame, but with respect. In the Aztec military tradition, a warrior who fought to the last moment, even in the moment of sacrifice, was honored for his courage. He was given a name. He was remembered. The Aztec world had a complex relationship with the people it killed. And they were enemies, but they were also offerings, and an offering that fought back was considered particularly powerful. Curiosity loop. And this leads to the question that Aztec historians still debate. What did the captives actually think was happening to them? Because the Aztec sources written from the perspective of the victors describe willing and even eager participants. But the Spanish accounts, written after interviewing people from conquered territories, describe something different. Describe terror. Describe people trying to run and being stopped by crowds of thousands. Describe captives weeping through the night before the ceremony. Both versions are probably partially true. Because 20,000 people are not a monolith. Some believed the theology and went willingly. Some were terrified and fought back. And some were numbed beyond response. The historical record contains all of these realities simultaneously. What the sources agree on is the aftermath. By the end of the 4 days, the Templo Mayor was covered in blood. The stone steps, the plaza below, the surrounding streets. Durán writes that the smell reached across the lake to the mainland. The city that had been decorated with flowers for the ceremony was now decorated with something else entirely. The skulls of sacrificed captives were placed on a rack called the tzompantli. Archaeological excavations of the Templo Mayor site, conducted by Mexican archaeologists from the 1970s onward, have found the physical evidence. Skull racks. Hundreds of skulls with holes driven through them for mounting. Mass deposits of human bone. The archaeology confirms what the historical sources describe. Pattern interrupt, 2000. Here's the modern parallel. I want you to consider carefully, because it's uncomfortable. Every major civilization in history has had something it considered so important, so fundamental to its survival, that it justified killing people for it. The Aztecs killed for the sun. Medieval Europe burned people alive for heresy. 20th century governments killed millions for political ideology. The specific justification changes. The capacity of human beings to create systems that make killing seem logical, necessary, even holy, does not change. The Aztecs were not uniquely evil. They were uniquely human. And that's the most disturbing thing about 1487. The Collapse and the Question, 2230 to 26. 32 years after the 1487 dedication, Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico. He had 600 men and 16 horses and a small number of cannons. He conquered the Aztec Empire in 2 years. How? The standard answer focuses on European weapons and disease. Both are real factors. But there's another factor that most textbooks overlook. When Cortés arrived, he immediately made alliances with the peoples the Aztecs had been victimizing for generations. The Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, the peoples who had been losing their warriors to flower wars for decades, who had been sending their captured sons to Tenochtitlan never to return, who had watched family members become sacrifices on the Templo Mayor. These peoples joined the Spanish not because they loved Europeans, they had no idea who Europeans were, but because they hated the Aztecs. Cortés didn't conquer the Aztec Empire. He provided the weapons for the Aztec Empire's enemies to finally conquer it themselves. Curiosity loop. And here's the irony that history delivers with devastating precision. The practice that Aztec rulers believed was keeping the universe alive, keeping the sun rising, maintaining cosmic order, was actually destroying their empire from the inside. Every captive sacrificed was a warrior from an enemy tribe who now had a family with a blood debt. Every flower war that produced sacrificial victims also produced enemies who would someday remember. The Aztec system of sacrifice was not just a religious practice. It was a geopolitical catastrophe in slow motion. By 1487, Ahuitzotl had probably already sealed the fate of his empire. He just didn't know it yet. When the Spanish arrived and the Aztec Empire collapsed, and the Templo Mayor was torn down, the stones were used to build the Metropolitan Cathedral of Mexico City, which still stands today, directly on top of the ruins of the Templo Mayor. And underneath the cathedral, underneath the colonial buildings, underneath the modern streets, the remains of the Templo Mayor waited. Mexican archaeologists found them in 1978 when workers laying electrical cables struck a carved stone disc. Excavations revealed the ruins of the pyramid and everything deposited within it: the offerings, the artifacts, the bones. After 500 years underground, the Templo Mayor confirmed that the historical sources were accurate. The scale of 1487 was real. The archaeology matches the documents. Closing hook. So what do we do with this? How do you hold in your mind simultaneously that the Aztecs built the most sophisticated civilization in the Americas, and that they killed 20,000 people in 4 days to keep the sun rising? How do you think about the captives who went willingly because they believed the theology, and the captives who fought back in their final moments because they didn't? How do you think about Ahuitzotl, who genuinely believed his empire's survival depended on what he was doing, and who was wrong in the most catastrophic way possible? I don't think there's a clean answer. I think the honest response is discomfort. The kind of discomfort that comes from realizing that civilization and atrocity are not opposites. That sophisticated, intelligent, creative, deeply human people built the Templo Mayor and filled it with blood. That the same culture that developed a calendar more accurate than Europe's also developed a theology that demanded 20,000 deaths in 4 days. That the things human beings believe most sincerely are sometimes the most dangerous things in the world. The Templo Mayor ruins are open to visitors today in Mexico City. You can walk through them. You can see the archaeological finds in the adjacent museum. You can look at the stones and the artifacts and the skulls and try to imagine what this place looked like in 1487, when it was new and gleaming and covered in blood. And standing there in the middle of a modern city, surrounded by traffic and tourists and the sounds of contemporary life, you might feel what historians feel when they study this material. Not horror at the Aztecs, but a kind of vertiginous recognition that human beings are capable of anything when they believe in it hard enough. And if that thought disturbs you, if it makes you want to understand more about how civilizations justify the unjustifiable, then subscribe. Because the next video is about another empire, another set of beliefs, another system that made ordinary people do extraordinary things in the name of gods and kings and cosmic necessity. And like this one, it is completely documented, completely real, and completely unlike what you were taught in school. The research is already done. It drops next week. Don't miss it.